James Franklin, obviously the top target for Virginia Tech in their head coaching search to be their next head football coach. The worst kept secret overall. I know everyone wants to talk about NDAs and how is any of this even getting out? Well, I think it is very evident to nearly everyone involved that James Franklin has obviously been circled as a top target for Virginia Tech. And on Tuesday, received and can now confirm reports that James Franklin was back in Blacksburg, Virginia, searching for houses. It sounds like prior times he'd been with a different committee member. It sounds like this time, this is unconfirmed. It sounds like he was with a different committee member looking at houses, but we can confirm that James Franklin was back in Blacksburg on Tuesday, November 11th, searching for houses in the Blacksburg region. It sounds like varying reports out there. If he was with family or different people, it sounds like he was alone. But now this third time documented coming to Blacksburg looking for houses. Obviously, the last time was prior to the Louisville game, and then a time before that. And there was some speculation around that. But now being able to confirm a third time, and I'm going to be pretty forward with it. Pretty youthful in covering all these deals, but talking to different people and different sources who have seen this. It's very rare for a target for a school to visit 3 times, especially looking at houses without things materializing further. So I think it is really important to say that while the deal is not done, and I know people want to say verbal agreements and all with that right now, even some people really privy to information, like even maybe leaking out or saying it's done, like really close to the situation, maybe even saying that, still not, I think we'll know soon confidently. And I can say that confidently. I know it's been imminent for a while, but just with the timeline and certain things, I think there's a little bit of a snag, and we'll get into that. Not a major snag at all. I think it's just obviously when dealing with a contract of this size that can affect so violently at the state level. You don't have to look far down to Louisiana, how big these coaching contracts can be, especially at the state level. But yeah, I think you got to feel pretty confident if you are a Virginia Tech fan, a Virginia Tech stakeholder. Things moving in a positive direction, that he's obviously back in the region looking, and it's been multiple times now dialing in on, a future home. So I think that is a really big aspect, especially when you start to hear some of those details pouring out. Yes, I know a lot of people wanted to make jokes about Wi-Fi, and I was camping out at the airport. No, didn't get any confirmed sightings, but was able to confirm through sourcing networks that he was here again. So we'll see, but I would say it would happen soon confidently. But this is the nature of these big contracts. I know people get frustrated. I see the chat lighting up, and we'll get back to it about break the news right now, say it's done. I mean, it's the nature of these big contracts. You can get all the way to the 11th hour. You don't have to look far to last year with Virginia Tech and their defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, and how that whole search went down. Obviously went down to the 11th hour until obviously things fell through, and then vet through, and then end up with Sam Seifkis. Jim Knowles goes to Penn State on $3 million contract, funnily enough, to coach with James Franklin. But I mean, that's a side note. But just to reiterate, I'm feeling good. I'm not a percentage on it. Just even looking at it, taking any maroon and orange shade off of it, obviously, I think if you're a Virginia Tech stakeholder, you're feeling good. And we'll get into what other schools and other notes going out, but I think you have to be feeling good. Prefacing this next point, I think it's really important to say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not pre-law. A lot of this flies over my heads, but diving into it, this sounds like one of those potential hold-up snags, maybe messing with the timeline. It sounds like that could be on the PS, the Penn State buyout terms portion, on how they're going to backload or offset, if it's going to be that lump sum or the monthly payment. Now, I know some of this trickling out as I checked in the chat, but it's just not the raw number of the buyout language in the contract. And like I said, pleading I'm not a master in this. Obviously, that's why you have lawyers on billable hours, which is why I think it's really important to say lawyers on billable hours with this. So maybe why I think it's still going to happen pretty quickly, but they're going to get theirs too, making sure this drags out, because the lawyers, they always know how to do that. But it's just not the number of the contract. Obviously, when you see he gets relieved of duties at Penn State, and you have that $49 million tag, and obviously a lot's been made of the duty to mitigate contract as why he has to go seek work. But it's not just, I think Red was on the VT Scoop, and also go get over to vtscoop.com, best place for all this as things are coming down the stretch. I think someone made the point, I think it was Red made the point of, okay, let's just say, and this is a rogue number, let's just say the flat contract will be worth $30 million with incentives up to, and this is just random numbers I'm picking, $30 million flat, but it has incentives to get it to, let's say, $60 million. How do you look at that? How do you account for that? How do you talk about, obviously James Franklin is looking at a house right now. How do you look at that aspect slipped into the contract? I'm not a lawyer. How does Penn State, how does that work into the offset clause? How do you negotiate that down? I don't know the legalese of it. I also don't know what that contract looks like, let alone a car, different amenities, tuition. If his daughters were to follow him, it's just a little bit of a headache, obviously shaking that all out. That's why, especially being a lawyer on these billable hours, it sounds like that's the last snag. I know a lot of it was made out to be Jimmy Sexton as a holdup at certain parts of this. And I think I saw a comment, we might touch on it. I think part of it is, last week it was like, was that the holdup, the buyout side? Yeah, I did hear parts of that, but I honestly do think this, when looking at the sphere of what jobs are coming open, where Franklin can see himself succeeding, and just all those factors, I think this is the best place. He was maybe waiting for that Florida job, some of those other jobs, to see if they had interest. Auburn potentially. Sounds like they're going to be moving different directions. So, and we'll get into timelines a little bit on why that's important, but I don't think this is a Sexton holdup. It sounds more like Penn State having to work through the back of that, because obviously lawyers are going to take their time, but if he signed before that, then you end up in a lawsuit, and that's something obviously you don't want to do. So Penn State's got to get that in writing, and then obviously that trickles down to Sexton to get Franklin to sign a term sheet, and then I guess that would go through Virginia government attorney general's office, because these contracts are massive. So I think that is a little bit of the snag that people are waiting on. That's what it's sounding like as of our latest reporting. I think that's really important to say, but at the same time, you have to take that with a grain of salt, knowing yesterday, Tuesday, November 11th, James Franklin was back in Blacksburg for his third time looking at houses. So if you're a Virginia Tech stakeholder, if you have interest, you have to feel pretty confident that you've gotten him on campus that many times in a coaching search. Obviously, they've circled it. It's no secret the top target, and it sounds like they've done exceedingly well in that regard. That's pretty much touching on the travel, what could potentially be the holdup. I think the next thing is the timeline. And before we do that, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video. I know I touched on it, but I appreciate everyone jumping in here as we're sort of filling in here, lighting up the live chat. Appreciate all the support. But the timeline, and this is something where it's like, I know people, there's such fatigue, and I led the last show with fatigue. When I run another one of these and James Franklin's in the title, it's like, as great as that is, there's going to be so many other aspects if this is to go through, of coaching tree and portal and high school, and a lot of it's going to come out of it. But right now, it just feels like a little bit of pandering. But the timeline has been so funky because they got so deep in discussions, and then there's just like sort of pulling the rope. And I think at different parts, there was give and take. The negotiations are pretty much over. We'll get into some different news and notes, but the offer has been out there. It's been on the table. It's very competitive, it sounds like. Now, I don't know what that structure is going to look like going back to the Penn State ordeal, but I think both sides are in a good place on it. It's just making sure that's all in place before anything happens. But, you get a text from someone that you trust saying, watch the next 48 hours. Obviously, the Miami game week has always been a really big marker in this whole ordeal, hearing from people connected to his camp saying, he wants to be on the ground, pretty much settled, or at least getting the formations of that prior to that Miami game to utilize that to try and get a kickstart on recruiting and everything for next season. Obviously, that's big. That Miami weekend is right after Florida State on the 15th here. So how do you get, when does this, I don't know the timeline. When does this officially get across? Because if you do follow that, it sounds like Saturday could be in that range. Obviously, a lot's been made in November 17th. Shout out at vtscoop.com. Message board is just absolutely amazing. I feel so lucky I've been exposed to it because, you have people almost like weeks ago saying, look, there's been this catering date set on November 17th. This could be a big welcome for a new coach. People in the band saying they've been alerted to November 17th is a big day. I think that 17th date's a little interesting, though, because the Board of Visitors have a meeting up in Northern Virginia. So obviously there's a little overlap with some members on the board, also on the committee, but those are really big stakeholders that are almost definitely going to be in the town of Blacksburg when James Franklin gets his official rollout. So is that 17th date legit for a press conference, one might say? I don't know. I could definitely see something, and honestly kind of feel confident saying something over the weekend or even prior to that. That's just the feeling I'm getting based on how things have progressed. Now, I don't know how things will evolve with the contracts at Penn State and how different things shake out, but I just don't really see it going past the weekend without an announcement. So I think that's kind of where it's at with the timeline, and I know that can wear people thin, obviously, as we were on here a week ago. As soon as we started to catch wind about it, it seemed like they wanted to lock this thing down. And for a multitude of reasons, obviously it's dragged out a little bit, but if you are Virginia Tech, I know it's been heart palpitations, up and down, up and down, up and down. But to get to this point, I think you got to be feeling pretty good that they've done their due diligence on that. Obviously, visiting for the third time, checking out houses, a little bit of the snag with Penn State, and then the timeline probably past the weekend. Some other notes before we get into questions. I know the show looks a lot different now with this because I do want to try to get to as many people's questions as possible. I appreciate everyone jumping in the live chat. It means a ton. Love the engagement. Hopefully it's valuable for everyone. Some last notes before I jump into that Q&A section. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Obviously, there's been a lot made on social media, different message boards about the Arkansas interest in James Franklin and different negotiations there. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm obviously not as connected down there at Arkansas with big boosters or honestly much down there. But it definitely does not sound like they are as far in the process with James Franklin. I think that might be a little bit of a smokescreen going some other way. Personally, I don't really feel like that is going to be a hindrance at all. I don't think that is going to be much of a factor, but obviously it's something to touch on as it's been making the rounds on social media. I know there's obviously some Arkansas people in here who will feel different about that. I'm not sure exactly how that goes, but I think Virginia Tech has to feel pretty good with the position they've slotted themselves in at. Next, I'm not exactly sure what that contract number is going to look like, especially with how the Penn State buyout looks like. If they try and backload it and try and get Penn State on the hook for some of it, I could see it being in total compensation close to a 9-figure deal with everything involved. But I don't know how that's going to look. How much is Virginia Tech going to foot? But I feel like it's going to be really competitive. I'm also not sure what they're going to do. I saw comments about, obviously, I took the trip up to Happy Valley this weekend for the game. Their infrastructure is a whole lot different than the Merriman complex. And if James Franklin, you bring him in, you bring a lot with him. Andy Frank and how they sort of operate, and his army, a lot's been made by Evan on the board of, the staff that he's accustomed to at Penn State. I'm not sure where they're going to house all those people if they bring that. So I think that'd be really big. I see a question about NIL. That was the next thing I was going to bring up. It sounded like the collective had a meeting sort of, making sure that you had those numbers legit, because you can go to Franklin and Sexton and all this and say, this is where we're at. This is the number. And that's cool. But it's like, can we believe that number? Because you've seen collective missed payments. You've seen people promise one thing and not deliver. I think feel pretty confidently to not put a value on that, but it's close to 3 times, if not more than 3 times, ponied up what was this year guaranteed and locked in for Franklin. It sounds like they had a meeting between the collective Franklin, and it sounds like some lawyers were involved with that to ensure, showing that they were ready to ante up on top of rev share to be extremely competitive. I know people will take that with a grain of salt, but extremely competitive, confident for that first year. And then obviously they feel good about years past that, but results on the field will I guess range that. But it sounds like they had a meeting with the collective. So I'm touching on that NIL question. And then lastly, obviously this whole segment gone 15 minutes, close to 20 minutes, talking about just James Franklin specifically. Obviously he's a very top target for Virginia Tech and their next head football coach. But behind him, the name that has emerged pretty much has been Bob Chesney at JMU. I know there was a lot of questions. Obviously, Franklin has the element if he's not coaching right now, can come in and hit the ground running. A big concern or reservation with Chesney there for a while was, is that JMU team going to land in the playoffs? Are they going to be playing into December and January? It doesn't look like that JMU team is going to stay there. And that sounds like they've sort of settled in as that backup 1A or B option. But obviously, it's full sails ahead for Virginia Tech looking at James Franklin. And looking at it, I feel pretty confident a deal gets done there in a rather timely manner. I know I feel it sound like a broken record saying that, but not much has changed on our side of the reporting. Just obviously some different parts of it.